I'm Stuart Nagel. I'm the vetch breeder from SARDI, part of the national program funded by GRDC. Before I start talking about vetch, I've actually noticed something I want to raise briefly. There's a hell of a lot of cowpea aphid on some of these. You can see the stems are black, there's cowpea aphid. A couple of years ago, particularly in this area, there was some issues around phytotoxicity in sheep, where sheep and everyone was blaming vetch at that point. What it is the aphids actually concentrate the nitrates, and if you put sheep in and graze this heavily, they'll get high nitrate levels in their bodies, and they'll start getting sunburn and issues. If you take them out of the paddock with it and put them in, usually in your shearing shed, it will go away. But it became a real problem. There was a couple of seminars on it. People started blaming vetch for it, but it's actually a legume thing with heavy cowpea aphid infestation. So you really do need to watch that. Quite apart from a production point of view, you need to watch that for a stock health point of view. It's just an interesting point because you can see it really heavily here, so it's worth noting. As Ren was saying about Studenitsa, it is quite exciting for this area. It's a very, very early maturity, and that's one thing that you actually have to be mindful of. Closer into Jamestown, they've always used a lot of woolly pods, which are very long season, late season vetches. Studenitsa flowers within about 85 to 90 days. Its maturity is really fast, but its bulk and biomass comes really early in the season. If you're looking for winter feed from a legume, it really is a good choice. Beth did some fodder cuts here last week. Studenitsa's peak of biomass is actually about a month before that. We did trials at Morchard, which is relevant to around here, Morchard, Loxton, Wakery over a couple of years, where we were cutting in the first to second week of August. And at that point, they were relatively good years. We were averaging 3.5 tonne dry matter, but at that point, Studenitsa had between 0.8 of a tonne more dry matter than Volga, and up to 1.2 tonne more than Morava, one of the older varieties. So its peak of growth comes really, really early. So you need to be mindful of, it's a grazing plant for that type of system. If you're looking for hay, it's probably not going to be the right choice. A lot of people are getting pretty funky with vetch and trying different things and trying to get it into their system. And I'm always interested to hear what farmers are doing. I got really excited earlier in the year. I was over at Georgetown in the hills. There was a whole paddock similar to this, a really quite steep paddock, and it was sown with about a 1.5 metre strip of vetch, 3 metre strip of barley, I think it was, another 1.5 metre strip all across the paddock. And I thought, crap, this is really exciting. This guy's doing something different for disease management or grazing. So I started ringing around the local farmers and asking what it was, and they went, that was a seeding stuff up. And he's just broadcast cereal over the top to try and recover it. And it's working great as a grazing, but people are trying different things. And we saw this year in Victoria, although we haven't been able to get there, I'm getting a lot of pictures out of Victoria, people started sowing their vetch really early this year. They had a break in, some of them as early as mid-March, they put their vetch in, and they were intending to take it through to hay, and the disease load has become enormous. And that is because they got in warm soil, they got massive canopy up early. Their last fungicide was back in June, and so they haven't been able to get fungicides in. The efficacy's worn off, and they've got massive botrytis grey mould. So when you're using it, you do need to really be mindful of what your end use is, where you're looking to go. If they graze those off, there would have been no problem. We were talking about Western Australia a bit earlier. The Western Australians on the sandbelt down around Esperance and that are sowing their vetches by choice in March, April, and they're aiming for 2 or 3 grazings before mid-September, and then they bomb it out. And if you're doing that, you haven't got disease and fungicide issues, but if you're looking for hay, you need to time your sowing better. You can't just think, I'll get it in now and I'll put up with it, because it really does become, that big canopy is a BGM nightmare at this time of season. So there are a couple of considerations. I'm surprised Ross didn't put in some woolly pods in here, the Capello, Haymaker, Namoy and RM4 types. If you're looking at a regenerative vetch, the older ones like Namoy and Haymaker and Capello in particular are very hard seeded. If you're looking for a hard seeded vetch, they're the ones you'd go to. They're very long season. They don't flower out to 120 days sort of thing. RM4's considered to be a softer seeded version of those. It still has a number of hard seeds, which you can't avoid. If you're growing other pulses, you need to think twice about it because you can't get them out of pulses very easily at the moment, although there is some potential coming with some of the lentils with herbicide tolerance. But those in a longer season environment produce higher dry matter levels. You see a fair bit around Jamestown in the higher rainfall, and in the same environment they will produce a ton to a tonne and a half more dry matter than the common vetches, so they are a really good option, but the grain is quite damaging to livestock, so you have to be mindful of that. They are just a hay or grazing option, and you can graze them hard a couple of times. The commons are more versatile. They're not hard seeded, so in a trial like this you won't see them coming back anywhere near as well. They're not hard seeded, but they give you really good bulk in that first season in a trial like this. The Upper North farming guys over at Bullaroo did a trial a couple of years ago with a more mixed variety of crops, where they were putting in forage brassicas, they were putting in some tillage radishes, and they made a combination of those, and that was really, really interesting. The sheep did really well on it because they were choosing their grazing option when they needed it. The tillage radish has got enormous, left huge channels in your soil for nutrient and water to get in, and it's a really good option, and vetch works well in some of those options. It's an interesting, it'd be interesting to try over here because I've seen some of the forage rapes around here do amazing things. You're combining vetch with that, there's some good options in there. If you're going hay, a lot of the serious hay producers in Victoria who have dairy farm markets combine vetch and canola to particular, well, there's multiple benefits in it. It keeps the crop up, it holds it up, it keeps diseases a little bit at bay because you've got more airflow, but you're also getting better dry down because your windrows are latticed with canola stalks, sorry about the wind, canola stalks, so you get better drying times, and the dairy farmers actually like that kind of mix. It's a really interesting option. There's a couple of crops down near just the other side of Clare where they've had sheep in all year on a canola, vetch canola mixes, and it seems to work really well. If you're taking it through to grain, it's also really simple to screen that out either way, and so you've got that option of helping your disease management. As Ren pointed out, Studenitsa, anything that comes out of our program is rust resistant. If you're still growing, and I know there is still people around growing Blanchford, Languedoc and Cummins, which are really old varieties of common vetch, they are really, really susceptible to rust. And being in a livestock type environment, you have to be mindful of that because really heavily rust infected crops can cause abortions in pregnant livestock. And so to take that away, you just buy decent disease resistant crops. Unfortunately, none of these have Botrytis grey mold tolerance yet, and the older varieties are susceptible to ascochyta as well, which we're seeing this year for the first time for a while. We have material in the program coming through, which I'd like to release in the near future if things work. That we have a later maturing line around a little bit later than Timok, which is a really, really acid tolerant line. And it's showing improved tolerance to ascochyta at the moment as well, but its strength has been, over the last few years, we've been trialling up at Georgetown in a paddock that's been limed up to just over 5. We've been trialling it there, Western Australia and in the southern slopes of New South Wales in acid environments, and it's topping grain and dry matter yields consistently. And it's not just a it's a better variety in most environments than the current varieties anyway, but in the acid environments, it seems to take a step. So that will be a really exciting thing for some of these areas where you've got acid. I'm seeing a few lupins behind out the back there. That will be an interesting option. It's a very, very good line in the Morava style of multi-purpose grain and hay. And in the woolly pods, we're looking to try and bring out a line that's a bit shorter season so that it fits into these environments a bit better. We're hoping it will prove to be soft-seeded as well, but there's one line in particular that's been yielding very well across the lower mid-north, where it's a bit better environment than this at times, but it sort of fits into up here as well. Whereas Studenitzer really was targeted for your Morchard, your Orroroo, the country where they're desperate for a legume that's not emetic that you can fit in and out of a crop. That's probably about enough, unless you guys have got questions. The question was, is there any hard-seeded work with woolly pods? We've tried really hard to go soft-seeded because particularly the woolies have always been into a higher rainfall environment, and so they've always been mixed in with beans and the higher value, even chickies at times, the higher value legumes, and we don't want to produce a super weed. So we've focused on soft seeded. There is some really hard seeded material out there that we could find quite easily. And we always get questions about, why don't you just give us a 30% hard seeded? And something like Nagel was, or still is, that sort of hard seeded. It'd be tempting in a cropping environment, but we'd have to differentiate it in some way to make it just a regenerating pasture crop. It'd be an interesting option. We can do it. The question was whether GM will work with us. We haven't. We're a very minor, small program. We haven't had the funds to go into that side of things, and vetch has traditionally been not an organic crop, if you like, but it's been used on that regenerative, you're looking for free nitrogen, that side of things. We haven't gone GM, but people have asked the question a lot about some of the herbicide tolerance traits that a couple of groups are putting into lentils and fabas and those, and we've avoided that to this point as well. I think the IMI chemistry is getting flogged. And I think we need to, this is probably a personal opinion, it's being flogged and it's getting overused, and if we produced a vetch which you could continue to use it, we'll lose those chemistries faster. And the other point is, if you can produce, I know they're working on a lontrel tolerant lentil, if you can produce a lentil or a chickpea or a lupin that are tolerant to these things, you'll be able to kill vetch out of it. So we're trying not to make vetch a superweed. A lot of your agronomists will tell you that you can't kill it now, and we don't want to go that path at the moment. That's not to say it won't happen. The funding of this program, while I'm on the topic, the funding of this program is up in the air at the moment. GRDC are changing the way they approach the breeding programs, and so where the reason I'm talking about the future releases that I hope to release is we're not certain where the program's going. We'll find out in the next month or two what's happening in the future, and so there's no saying we won't go there. But while I'm leading the program, we're not going down that herbicide tolerance or the GM path at the moment. It's a traditional crop that should be used for farmers, not go the other way. The question was around if there's anything with a better stubble cover. It's hard with the grazing issue in particular. When it's cut for hay, it's a fairly good stubble left behind, but if you graze it, it's a curse of the palatability of the plant, if you like. Your lucerne and things like that are quite stalky and woody, so they maintain a base. The vetch is very palatable, and you'll see if you put stock in on a vetch stubble, they'll chase it, they'll chase the seed, and they'll rip the plant out of the ground. So it's really hard to have that stubble. Something like this mix with a medic underneath it may hold the soil better over summer, but it is a management thing. The only real way of getting out of it is getting the sheep off earlier, because it is even the stalk is very palatable. It's one of the things the dairy farmers like about it. When you feed a legume hay, they often go through and throw out the stalk and that, whereas the vetch, they'll just vacuum it up, and that's the curse of why you get your paddock blowing away. Yes. One of the other questions I always get is about harvestability. We don't have an option like field peas where they went semi-leafless. We want, because it's a multi-purpose crop, we want leaf, we want stalk, we want it all. And these aren't great examples, but when something like Morava in particular and the woolly pods, when they're at full growth, they're a 6 to 8 foot tall plant. There's no way to make it stand up. Even canola, I've had farmers plant a heavy crop of canola with their vetch to keep it up off the ground, and they ring in late September and start complaining that the vetch has just crushed the canola and pulled it down. It just becomes too heavy once it starts potting. Harvestability is always going to be an issue with these type of legumes.